Welcome, everyone, to What's the Beef with Beef, where we grill our contestants with sizzling questions about the beef industry. I'm your host, Chuck T-Bone, ready to serve up some juicy knowledge. Let's meet all our contestants.
Hi, Meatloaf.
Happy Grillmore.
I'm Krabby Patty.
I'm Miss Wellington.
I'm Funny Bone.
All right, let's get cooking with our first category here about the marketing of beef. Here's your first question. This aspect of beef marketing faces challenges due to concerns about saturated fats and cholesterol, requiring efforts to promote leaner cuts and healthier production practices.
What is the primary health-related challenge in marketing of beef?
Correct. You've seared through our first question. Let's marinate on that one for a moment. Did you know that beef's a great source of essential nutrients like iron and B12? It's all about balance and informed choices.
I've heard this is one of the most significant debates of the health implications of beef consumption, with the concerns of its link to chronic health issues such as heart disease and certain cancers.
Well, we are just full of knowledge here, folks. Looks like you've done your research, haven't you? Now let's chew on our next question. Here's a juicy one. Traditional beef producers must address the appeal of plant-based proteins and lab-grown meat by highlighting the unique nutritional advantages of beef and promoting these practices.
Yeah, beef marketers must effectively respond to the increasing popularity of plant-based proteins and lab-grown meat by emphasizing the distinctive nutritional benefits of beef and incorporating both sustainable and ethical practices.
Exactly. You're on a roll. Now let's graze our way over to the final marketing question about the labeling and certification of beef. What is a key challenge related to labeling and certification of beef?
There is consumer confusion surrounding terms like organic, grass-fed, and free range, highlighting a significant challenge in the aspect of beef marketing, necessitating standardized practices and clear communication.
Spot on. Navigating labels can be like walking through a maze, right? Grass-fed, organic. Labels tell a story about how the cattle was raised and the beef was produced. There should be standards and protocols in place, creating uniform standards for good labeling. The stakes are high here, folks, and that brings us to the next round of questions on animal welfare. Let's take a look at ethical considerations. How do housing considerations affect the welfare of beef cattle?
Feedlot house cattle engage in more aggressive behaviors such as headbutting, pushing, and displacement. They spend more time standing and walking and less time in lying positions when compared to cattle with pasture access.
That is right. Did you also know that cattle raised in straw floor environments have fewer health issues, better hygiene, and enhanced performance measures compared to cattle raised on concrete or rubber floors?
That's interesting, Chuck. I also read a study that said decreased space allowance has shown to negatively impact the cattle's comfort state, impacting productivity and performance. Makes you wonder how these conditions affect the meat.
Holy cow, now you're thinking. The treatment of beef cattle does have a direct impact on the quality of meat produced. Do you know how?
Yeah, conditions that are unsanitary or that cause increased stress lead to decreased quality. Unsanitary and overcrowded conditions increase the risk of disease transmission, such as E. coli and salmonella, posing food safety risks that may transmit during the processing stage. And stressed cattle produce meat with different composition, including high cortisol and lower pH levels, affecting tenderness, flavor, and texture of meat.
You betcha. Now we're cooking here. Let's shake it up a bit and look into the best part of beef, the consumption of it. What is the cultural significance of beef consumption?
In many societies, beef is not just a dietary staple, but also a symbol of cultural identity and is associated with celebratory events, playing a central role in reinforcing cultural bonds and traditions.
Fantastic. We're cooking here, folks. On to our next sizzling question. What are the power dynamics in beef consumption debates?
The ongoing debates about beef consumption involve various stakeholders with different degrees of influence, including government bodies, the beef industry, consumers, and environmental advocates. The power dynamics shape policies related to beef production and consumption.
Impressive work. You really know your stuff. Let's turn up the heat by adding some difficult questions on the next round about beef and the environment. What has been negatively affecting beef cattle and producers globally?
What are changing weather conditions?
Hot diggity. Global warming has contributed to droughts, decreasing the natural forage cattle depend on for survival, forcing them to walk longer distances in search for food and water.
But doesn't that result in smaller cattle with lower immunity and in some cases starvation and death?
It sure does. Talk about a decrease in value for producers. What is the biggest environmental impact of beef cattle production on climate change?
What are greenhouse gas emissions, Chuck?
Right, you are.
But that question isn't entirely fair. Focusing solely on greenhouse gas emissions ignores other important environmental factors like reactive nitrogen losses, water consumption, and dependence on fossil fuels. Using a carbon footprint as an indicator of polluters is kind of misleading, as some systems with lower carbon usage actually have higher energy consumption.
You're really raising the stakes with this information. Let's see if you can devour this one. What is heritage beef cattle?
What is a breed of cattle that existed before the industrial agricultural practice of bioengineering?
Unbeefleavable. That is correct.
These heritage breeds have actually kept their adaptive traits, making them sturdier and able to navigate the extreme weather conditions. They may even have lighter environmental footprints as they travel faster across ranges in search of food.
Could we beef having any more fun here? Let's add some flavor with questions on beef cattle processing. What is the Safe Foods for Canada Act 2019?
This act gives the Canadian Food Inspection Agency the power to create procedures for the humane treatment and slaughter of animals, which in turn regulates the speed in which the production lines can work, benefiting workers and creating a less stressful workplace.
That is correct. Now see if you can answer this one. What is the Canadian On-Farm Food Safety Program?
It provides training, record-keeping systems, and certification for farmers.
Correct. It was created in 1997 and provides plans for risk reduction to help identify hazards by regulating feed, water, and making suggestions for working with high-risk animals. Last question on processing. What is the HACCP?
The Hazard Analysis and Critical Control Point.
You really know your stuff.
It was developed in the 1960s to provide quality control by identifying hazards to the food and the point in the processing in which those hazards could be controlled, therefore making food safer for consumers.
I've never met such a smart group of people, beef for. Now let's move on to the lightning round with questions on beef production. What is the most problematic greenhouse gas emitted in beef production?
Methane, a potent greenhouse gas emitted by cattle during digestion.
Correct.
The digestive tracts of cattle have an organ called a rumen, which ferments fibrous plants such as grass before passing through the rest of the digestive tract. During this fermentation, methane is produced and released into the atmosphere.
That's right. Why are cattle more resource intensive than other livestock?
While cattle produce offspring at a slower rate than other livestock, such as chickens or pigs, cattle generally only produce one calf every 1.5 to 2 years, unlike pigs, which produce 7 to 14 infants per year, or chickens, which can produce over 300 chicks per year.
Correct. Because of their slow production rate, a large amount of resources in the form of food, water, and energy are spent on maintaining cattle herd population levels, and thus beef uses more resources pound for pound than other types of livestock. Alrighty, our last question. What advantage does raising cattle over other livestock present to producers?
Cattle can eat plant forage, which grow in areas unsuitable for crop production due to low precipitation or low quality soil. This allows humans to benefit from a form of agriculture in areas where it otherwise would not exist.
Right, you are. Did you know that grassland ecosystems also benefit from grazing ruminant species?
Yep, that's the way to recycle plant material into nutrient-dense manure and mitigate the encroachment of woody species such as shrubs and trees.
Well, that's a wrap for our beefy questions for today. Thanks for joining us on What's the Beef with Beef. Remember, whether you're a beef aficionado or just curious about your food, keep questioning and keep learning. Thank you. Thank us for another time, another round of meaty questions and hearty discussions. Stay tender and keep grilling with knowledge.